Listen, I'm letting this slide for now. Just come back, and I'll overlook it, at least this once. What on earth is this guy talking about? He must be completely clueless. It's time he got a taste of reality. My name is Olivia, and I'm 32. I've been married to Mason for a year now. We met at a casual get-together hosted by a friend, hit it off, started dating like any other couple, and eventually got married. We're not getting any younger, after all. Mason isn't the most thrilling person, but he brings a sense of calm to my life. I thought we'd grow old together, spending our days in peaceful contentment. We both work, so money's never been an issue. We didn't overthink our decision to get married, since we're both busy with work. I take care of most of the housework. Mason never pitches in. He's either lounging around or leaving early, rarely spending time at home, but I've never found the chores burdensome. My parents lived this way, so I accepted it as the life a wife would have. I have a 9-to-5 job, and I'm not overloaded with hobbies. Mason and I were never the chatty type. We respected each other's space, and it worked for us. Life went on. One night, Mason came home late, probably after drinks with coworkers or friends, who knows. I greeted him. Mason, you're home late. Had a long night, dinner's still on the table, but I guess you're not eating this late, are you? He turned away, didn't say a word, and walked into the living room, ignoring me. I sighed. Here we go again. Whenever Mason's in a bad mood, he goes quiet. I figured something at work or during his night out must have upset him. It's best to leave him be. I know better than to push when he's like this. I felt his presence in the living room but shrugged it off and went to bed. He'll probably be back to his usual self by morning. It was a familiar pattern, so I didn't dwell on it. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, Mason came into the kitchen. Good morning, I said cheerfully. Mason glanced at me, grabbed some milk from the fridge, and left without a word. I was taken aback by his coldness. It wasn't like him. Seems like he's still in a bad mood. I never thought I'd see the day. I'm used to us being strong, independent people. I hadn't made it a habit to talk much to Mason. Really, I decided to wait it out, so I continued preparing our lunch boxes, but things didn't go back to normal as easily as I'd hoped. Mason stayed distant the next night and the night after that. I started to worry. Days turned into weeks, and Mason kept up the silent treatment. I tried reaching out through WhatsApp and left him notes, but he ignored everything. However, he did eat the meals I prepared. I noticed the empty lunch box in the sink, so I knew he ate the lunch I'd packed. I even put a note in the cooler bag, hoping he'd read it and respond. But that was another dead end. Mason said nothing. Before I knew it, over a month had passed in this strange silence. I felt helpless. I tried everything, but nothing seemed to work. Then, one evening, I decided to take a bold step. I deliberately didn't make dinner. Every evening, I'd come home and prepare a meal. But tonight I wanted to see how Mason, who had been ignoring me, would react if I didn't. When Mason came home, I pretended to watch TV in the living room. He walked in and looked intently at the dining table, where dinner usually waited. But tonight the table was bare. After staring at the empty table, Mason turned his gaze toward me. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something, but he just walked out of the room in complete silence. I heard the front door open and then slam shut. I was left stunned. Why is he ignoring me like this? I had no idea what was going on. Bewildered, I sat alone on the living room couch, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, I woke up and went to the living room. Mason was already gone. Did he leave for work already? I wondered. My eyes fell on a note left on the table. As I read it, my heart sank and anger surged within me. It said, in messy handwriting, "Stop skipping out on your wifely duties." Something inside me snapped. That was it. I was done. Why should I keep bending over backward to please Mason? Is this how my life is supposed to be forever? We were never the clingy type, but this was unacceptable, and the silent treatment for the past month had been unbearable. I grabbed a pen and wrote next to Mason's scribble, "I'm going back to my parents' house." Then I quickly packed my things and left. My sudden arrival surprised my parents, but once I explained how Mason had been ignoring me for over a month without any explanation, they understood and welcomed me with open arms. It felt good to be in a place where I could actually talk to someone. For now, I decided to stay and see how Mason would react before figuring out my next move. The day I left, I didn't hear a word from Mason. Knowing him, he probably thought I was just trying to make a point and would continue to ignore me. Fine, Let's see how long this standoff lasts. Days turned into weeks. And still, no call, no message, nothing. He didn't even bother to come by my parents' house. Before I knew it, half a year had passed, and Mason was nearly out of my mind. Then one day, as I was leaving my parents' house to go shopping, I saw him, Mason, standing there with a defiant, angry look on his face. I froze, completely caught off guard. He just stood there, glaring at me, still refusing to speak. Was this some kind of game to him? It was almost laughable how committed he was to this silent act. But then, as I stood there in shock, Mason tried to walk into my parents' house without a word. Whoa, hold on there, I said, blocking his path. Mason looked at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, but he still didn't speak. I warned him, don't just walk in, or I'll call the police. Finally, after more than 6 months, Mason spoke, a snide smile creeping across his face. Look at you, acting all tough. Since when do you think you can talk to me like that? Just because you're at your parents' house doesn't mean you can get all high and mighty. I remembered Mason being a bit rough around the edges, but not like this. As I was lost in thought, Mason suddenly exploded. What the hell do you think you're doing? You disappear for half a year, living it up at your parents' place. Get a grip, he ranted on, spreading his arms wide as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Look, I'm giving you a pass this time, okay? Just come back home. I'm willing to let it slide this time. His condescending tone was the last straw. I calmly replied, I think you're mistaken. You and I are strangers now. Mason's face went blank, and then he turned beet red with rage. He started yelling again. What the hell are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? We're married, aren't we? Stop playing games. His outburst was so intense it left me momentarily speechless. And he kept going. I'm saying I'll forgive you this time. So stop fooling around and pack your things. At that moment, my own anger boiled over. He was talking like he was doing me a favor by forgiving me, as if I was the one in the wrong. The sheer arrogance of it infuriated me even more, and it was clear that Mason had no idea what had really happened in the last 6 months. Finally, I snapped at him, who was still yelling. I received divorce papers from your mother, signed them, and already filed them with the court. So, we're not married anymore, got it? We're strangers now, total strangers, understand? I emphasized the word strangers, and Mason's face went pale. He looked genuinely shocked. Here's what happened. About a month after I moved back in with my parents, my then mother-in-law, Helen, called and asked to meet me at a cafe near their house. We had never been close, and it had been a while since I'd last seen her. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, she handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked, tilting my head in confusion. Open it, even you should be able to understand, she replied curtly. I opened the envelope and pulled out the document inside. It was a divorce petition, already signed and stamped by Mason. Stunned, I looked at Helen, whose eyes, so much like Mason's, were filled with disdain. As I put the petition back into the envelope, I asked, so, is this Mason's doing? Did he say anything to you about this? Helen let out an exaggerated sigh before answering. Oh yes, he said plenty. Want to hear? I smiled politely and replied, sure, go ahead. She didn't hold back. According to her, Mason had been bad-mouthing me for some time, claiming I was a useless, incompetent wife who had stopped doing any housework after we got married, that I'd quit my job and lazed around the house all day, and that whenever things didn't go my way, I'd run back to my parents like a spoiled child. As she spoke, Helen's gaze never wavered, and it was clear she believed every word of Mason's lies. I knew there was no point in arguing with her. When she finished, Helen asked, so, what are you going to do? Not that I want to meddle, but you've been pretty awful, you know. By the time I walked out of that cafe, my mind was made up. I smiled at Helen and said, if he wants a divorce, then that's exactly what he'll get. Helen gave me one last glare, slapped some money on the table for her coffee, and stormed out. I went straight back to my parents' house, signed the divorce papers, and submitted them to the court the very next day. As I explained all this to Mason, his face grew even paler. It seemed Helen had never told him about the divorce papers I'd filed, but honestly, I didn't care. I'd entrusted Helen with the signed documents, assuming Mason had wanted the same thing. When I finished telling my story, Mason blurted out in a panic, no, you've got it all wrong. I only filled out those divorce papers to get my mom off my back. I never intended to submit them. They're invalid. He was either panicking or confused because he started making no sense. Besides, you'll be the one who suffers if we divorce. Let's go to the court right now and have them withdrawn. I gave him a cold stare and tilted my head. Why would getting divorced be a problem for me? Suddenly, Mason grinned like he had figured something out. Think about your age. At your age, with a divorce on your record, no one will want you. That's why I'm saying I'll take you back. I'm doing this for your benefit. Get it? We can pretend the divorce never happened. And you should be grateful. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at Mason's arrogance and delusion. Listen, we're not kids. A divorce doesn't just get erased. And for the record, I'm already married to someone else. Mason's jaw dropped, and he went silent for a moment. What? Really? Do you want me to repeat myself? I'm married to someone else. Mason, still in disbelief, suddenly started making a scene. That's a lie. You're just trying to save face, aren't you? You're making up stories to get rid of me. You think you can fool me with such lies? If he wanted to be a fool, that was his problem. As I wondered how to handle this, a presence appeared behind me, a man standing at the entrance, looking between Mason and me with a puzzled expression. Mason, taken aback by the sight of a stranger emerging from my parents' home, fell silent. The man tilted his head and asked, "Is something wrong?" Feeling awkward, I smiled and turned to Mason. "This is my husband, Noah." Noah greeted Mason with a slight, skeptical nod. Mason took a step back, his eyes widening as he took in Noah's imposing physique. It made sense. Noah was a former national rugby player. Overwhelmed by Noah's presence, Mason suddenly started making excuses. No, you've got it all wrong. My old boss told me you'd been married for about a year now, and he warned that your wife might get too comfortable, said I should keep her in check. So I did, and guess what? Turns out he got dumped by his wife and kids. What a fool, right? I was just doing what he told me to do. I never wanted to do any of that stuff. You understand, right, Olivia? I stared at Mason with disgust, completely fed up with his pathetic excuses. He looked puzzled, maybe because my reaction wasn't what he expected. Then Noah spoke up. Sorry, but you need to leave and never come back here. If you approach Olivia again, I'll call the police. Noah firmly pushed Mason out of the doorway. Intimidated by Noah's force and determination, Mason fled. For a while, we stayed on alert, worried that Mason might try something irrational. But as days turned into weeks, we heard nothing from him. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I reached out to a mutual friend to ask about Mason. After some casual catching up, I asked about him, and our friend sighed before filling me in. Apparently, Mason had quit his job just a few days after showing up at my parents' house. The reason? Mason had always gone along with his boss, who had a reputation for harassing subordinates at work. It became a significant issue within the company. The boss was eventually resigned, a polite way of saying he was demoted to some remote, unheard of location. Mason was expected to be transferred as well, but out of pride, he quit instead. According to our friend, Mason is still jobless and struggling to find work. His arrogance has only made things worse. Even when recruiters offer him opportunities, he turns down interviews, believing they're beneath him. Word of his quitting eventually reached his mother, who, true to her extreme nature, disowned him. Now, he spends his days blaming everything on his old manager and drowning his sorrows in alcohol. At this rate, he'll ruin his health before he ever finds another job. It's a sad situation, and while I hope he finds a new partner to help him get back on track, that seems unlikely. We both chuckled as we hung up the phone, thinking about how Mason's life had taken such a downward spiral while mine had flourished. Thanks to him, I'm now living a peaceful life with Noah. Interestingly, Noah was actually a colleague of mine. When he heard about my divorce, he didn't waste any time pursuing me, although we started dating only 6 months after my divorce, which initially made me a bit hesitant. I was quickly drawn to his confident manner and kind personality. After we got married, Noah confessed that he had always had a crush on me and was heartbroken when I got married. I laughed and apologized for not noticing his feelings sooner. Noah is everything I never knew I needed. He helps me around the house, something I used to handle alone. Whenever we eat together, he always compliments my cooking with a smile. And it's these small gestures that fill me with joy, something I never expected. I guess I had become numb to such things after growing up with old-fashioned parents. Now, I'm living a truly happy life with Noah, who finds joy in the simplest moments. I'm confident that with him by my side, we'll enjoy a lifetime of happiness, all the way through our golden years.